Everyone in the castle laughed the first time the king called him half a guard. The insult echoed through the great hall, bouncing off stone and banners as courtiers tried, and failed, to hide their smiles. Sir Aldrin stood there in front of them all, armor on only one shoulder, empty sleeve tied neatly at his side, where a right arm used to be. Once, he had been the king's favorite sword. Now, he was a joke that still wore steel. "Tell me," the king said that day, lounging on his throne, voice dripping with amusement, "what can a guard with one arm possibly defend?" The court roared with laughter. Aldrin bowed his head, not because he agreed, but because arguing would have cost him more than his pride. From that day on, servants whispered when he passed. Young knights smirked, older ones looked away, embarrassed for him. Every time the king needed someone to mock to impress his guests, Aldrin was there, like a scar the crown refused to let heal. And yet, on a stormy night, when the torches burned low and footsteps echoed wrong in the great hall, the king would finally learn the answer to his own question. What can a one-armed guard defend? Everything that still matters. They still whispered his old name sometimes, when they thought he couldn't hear. Aldrin the Unbroken, the king's fastest sword, the man who stood in the breach at Redmere Pass until the river itself ran red. That was before. Now, as he crossed the training yard with his empty right sleeve tied neatly at his side, the whispers had changed. "You are half a guard. Should have stayed in the infirmary. Only still here because the king feels sorry for him." Steel rang in the cold morning air as young knights drilled in lines, blades flashing in practiced arcs. Aldrin watched their footwork as he passed, the way their stance shifted too wide, the way their wrists twisted just a little too far on each swing. He could have corrected a dozen mistakes in 10 steps. No one asked. "Sir Aldrin," a voice called. He turned. It was Ronan, a boy hardly older than 18, still more limbs than armor. His helmet sat crooked on his head. His breastplate looked one size too big. "Captain of the Half Guard," Ronan said with a crooked grin, falling in step beside him. "You're early. Again." Aldrin snorted. "The man who's lost an arm learns to make friends with time. It doesn't give second chances." Ronan's smile faltered, guilt flickering across his freckled face. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Aldrin cut in, not unkindly. "Just tighten the strap on your left pauldron. If you raise your shield like that in a real fight, you'll lose more than a helmet." Ronan blinked, then quickly adjusted the leather strap. The boy idolized him. That was the worst part. Ronan had grown up on stories of Aldrin's battles, of the night he'd dragged 3 wounded men from a burning gate with blood in his eyes and a broken spear in his side. Ronan hadn't been there when Aldrin lost his arm. No one from the court had. No one who now laughed when the king said half a guard had seen Aldrin on the field, holding a shield in his left hand while his right arm hung useless and bloody, refusing to fall until the last civilian wagon made it through the gate. Scars did not count as proof in marble halls. A horn sounded from the inner yard. 3 short blasts. Ronan flinched. "Summons to the Great Hall, the king's breakfast court." "Go," Aldrin said. "They'll want knights standing pretty behind chairs." "Aren't you coming?" Ronan asked. Aldrin forced a thin smile. "Oh, I'll be there," he said. "The king never wastes an opportunity." Ronan hesitated. Opportunity for what? To remind everyone what happens when his favorite sword breaks. He said it lightly, but it tasted like iron in his mouth. The great hall of Eldenfort glowed with morning fire. Long tables stretched from the wide doors to the raised dais where the king's chair sat beneath a banner of gold and deep green. Servants moved like a quiet current around the edges, filling goblets, setting down platters, whisking away crumbs before they could offend noble eyes. Aldrin took his place along the wall with the other guards. Not at the front, not at the doors, but just slightly to the side, where he could be seen when people wanted to look, and forgotten when they didn't. His armor was simpler than the knight's, but well polished. His left shoulder bore the royal crest. His right, empty pauldron strap lay flat against the cloth of his tunic, nothing to hold. "Try smiling," murmured Garrick, another guard at his side. "Maybe he'll pick on someone else today." "He'll pick on whoever makes the rest laugh loudest," Aldrin replied. "Today, that's still me." Garrick grimaced. "Doesn't sit right. A king mocking the man who took an arrow meant for his throat." Aldrin's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Long enough that he can pretend it was someone else." Trumpets blared. Conversation died. King Edric entered with easy, practiced grace. Dark hair threaded with silver, crown resting light on his brow like it had never been forged of anything heavier than air. He wore a simple dark tunic today, but the way the room tilted toward him proved he didn't need jewels to shine. Behind him walked two men of note. Lord Merron, master of coin, his belly pressing against rich fabric, eyes always measuring, and Sir Corvin, the silver-haired captain of the Royal Guard, whose gaze flicked over the room like a sharpened blade. Edric sat. The hall exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth as polished wood. "Let's see who needs my wisdom today." His wisdom. What he meant was, "Let's see who will amuse me." Petitions began. A merchant complaining of taxes, a minor lord grumbling about border disputes, a noblewoman worried about stolen jewels she'd probably misplaced herself. Edric listened. Sometimes he decided fairly. Sometimes he decided foolishly. Always he decided loudly. Aldrin watched, silent. He saw things others did not. The twitch of a jaw here, the tightening of fingers on a cup there, the way a guard shifted weight closer to the king whenever certain names were spoken. Being half a guard, it turned out, left him with more attention to spare. "Next," the king said eventually, bored. Sir Corvin leaned down to murmur something in his ear. Edric's eyes flicked to Aldrin. Ah, there it was. "Actually," the king said, voice brightening, "I find myself in need of a demonstration." The court stirred. People loved this part. "Sir Aldrin," Edric called, though everyone knew he hadn't been Sir in 3 winters. "Step forward." Aldrin's muscles moved before his mind had finished sighing. He stepped away from the wall, boots ringing faintly on the stone as he walked to the center of the hall. Every eye turned toward the right side of his body first, drinking in the empty sleeve like vultures to a wound. Edric rested his chin on his fist. "Remind us," the king said. "How many campaigns did you fight in under my banner?" "7, Your Majesty," Aldrin replied. "And how many duels?" 14. "And how many times did you lose?" Aldrin hesitated. The hall leaned in. "None, Your Majesty." Soft laughter rippled. Edric smiled. "And yet," he said, "here we are." His gaze dropped pointedly to Aldrin's missing arm. "Tell me, unbroken," he said, deliberately using the old title like a joke. "What use is a guard with one arm?" Aldrin held his eyes, something cold and steady rising beneath the familiar bruising shame. "With respect, Your Majesty," he said, voice level, "a guard is not measured by the number of arms he has, but by what he's willing to stand between and the blade." A few servants looked down quickly, hiding small smiles. Edric's eyes glittered. "Clever," he said. "But words do not stop steel." He flicked his fingers at Sir Corvin. "Captain," the king said lightly, "show us. If a blade came for me from the right, could our one-armed friend do anything at all?" The hall buzzed. Sir Corvin hesitated. Just a flicker, then obeyed, stepping to Aldrin's right side. The old captain's movements were slow, deliberate, almost apologetic. "Defend me," Edric ordered. "However you can." A wooden practice blade was tossed to Corvin from a nearby rack, harmless enough for a demonstration. He held it loosely, not even in a proper stance. This was, to the court, a joke. Corvin lifted the sword with his right hand and swung it in a lazy arc toward Aldrin's exposed right shoulder. The side with no arm, no shield, no chance. Gasps and muffled laughter rose. In that instant, Aldrin did nothing. He did not move. He did not flinch. He simply watched the blade come, eyes steady. At the last possible second, Corvin arrested the strike himself, stopping the wooden sword inches from Aldrin's neck. The room chuckled. "See?" Edric spread his hands. "Even our brave Aldrin cannot stop what he cannot reach." He turned to the hall. "But remember, people of Eldenfort, I am generous. I keep him. I feed him. I give him a place at my wall. Not every king would waste silver on half a sword." Laughter broke fully now. Some forced, some genuine, all of it heavy. Aldrin felt each sound like a stone. He bowed, first to the king, then to the room, because anything less would be grounds for exile. As he turned away, Ronin's eyes met his from the line of younger guards. Wide, furious, helpless. Aldrin gave the boy the smallest shake of his head. Don't speak. Don't move. Don't ruin your future on my broken past." He returned to his place at the wall. The rest of the morning was a blur of petitions and judgments, none of which mattered. Only one thing stuck in Aldrin's mind. The question Edric had thrown at the hall like a joke. What use is a guard with one arm? By the time the sun had begun to sink and the castle's long shadows stretched across the inner yard, the question had become a promise. One day, Aldrin thought, the king will ask that question again, but not with laughter in his voice. And someone, fate, the gods, or whatever cruel thing watched from the high rafters, seemed to agree. Because as torches were lit that night, and rain began to fall in cold silver sheets against the castle windows, a man Aldrin had never seen before slipped through the outer gate, wearing a harmless servant's cloak, walking with a harmless servant's step, and carrying, hidden in his sleeve, a knife meant for a king. Rain came first. It started as a whisper against the stone, faint, almost polite. By the time the castle lamps were being lit, it had turned into a steady drumming, like fingers tapping on the roof of Eldenfort, impatient and cold. Aldrin stood his post in the great hall again, left shoulder against the wall, one hand resting near the hilt of his sword. The hall looked different at night. Fewer nobles, fewer servants, more shadows. The king held a smaller private feast for his closest advisors. Lord Marin, Sir Corvin, two lesser lords whose names changed depending on who needed favor that week. Edric laughed louder at night. Wine did that. "And I told him," the king said, lifting his goblet, "if my one-armed guard can stand straighter than you, you're not drunk. You're useless." The men around him roared with laughter. The words floated down the hall and hit Aldrin's ears like dull blows. He didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing he could do was show the king he'd found the bruise. "Still here, half a guard?" Lord Marin called, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "You must be loyal to keep coming back for this." Or stubborn, Aldrin thought. Or stupid. "Loyalty is hard to waste once you've earned it," Aldrin said calmly. "It clings." Sir Corvin's gaze flicked toward him, then away. A faint warning lived in his eyes. Not hostility, but the weary recognition of a man who had seen too many good soldiers tested to breaking. "Leave it, Marin," Corvin muttered. "The king's had his sport today." Edric waved a hand. "I will have my sport when I like. If my guard cannot withstand a jest, how can he withstand a blade?" He said it lightly. But somewhere in the farthest shadow of the hall, a man in a plain servant's cloak heard only the last word. Blade. He moved like someone who knew how to disappear. He had entered with the kitchen staff carrying a crate. No one had looked twice. Servants changed often, faces blurred. Who counted them? Who cared? Aldrin did. Not enough to act yet, not enough to name why, but enough that his eyes kept returning every few breaths to that same corner. Something itched at the back of his thoughts. The man moved correctly for a servant. Head slightly bowed, steps quiet, shoulders tired, but his stance betrayed him. Feet always placed with balance, shoulders never too slumped, hands never fully relaxed. Aldrin had seen that posture before, on battlefields, not in kitchens. He shifted his weight subtly, angling his body so his left eye had a clearer path across the hall. The man in the cloak set down his crate near a pillar. A moment later he straightened and did not bend again. His hand disappeared into his sleeve. The air in the hall changed. Aldrin didn't hear anything. No shout, no clash, no command. But he felt it, like the tiny breath before a storm's first lightning. Sir Corvin was watching the king. Lord Merrin was watching his wine. The lesser lords were watching each other. Only Aldrin was watching the shadow. The cloaked man stepped away from the pillar, each stride precise, aimed not at the tables, not at the servants, at the dais, at the king. In that instant, time forked. In one path, half the hall noticed too late. In another, no one noticed at all. But in this one, a one-armed guard moved. Aldrin did not shout. There was no time. His left hand dropped to the hilt of his sword, fingers closing, drawing in one smooth motion. Pain flared along old scars, as his body remembered what it had been, and refused to accept what it lacked. He pushed off the wall with his shoulder. The world narrowed. The cloaked man's hand flashed from his sleeve, steel catching torchlight. A thin, dark knife, perfect for slipping between ribs. Aldrin's boots hit stone. 3 long strides. The assassin surged forward, cloak flaring back, face now visible. Sharp, unremarkable, the kind that disappeared into crowds. His arm drove the knife straight toward the king's unguarded side. "Aldrin!" someone shouted. Later he would realize it was Corvin. But the sound came distant, useless. The distance between assassin and king vanished. Aldrin was still too far. In the old days, he would have lifted his shield with his right arm, taking the blow on wood and iron, letting the shock run up muscles that no longer existed. Tonight, he had no shield. He had only his body, and one last lesson to teach the king. At the final moment, Aldrin changed direction. He did not aim for the knife. He did not reach for the assassin's wrist. His left arm could be knocked aside too easily, the angle all wrong. Instead, he drove his shoulder into the man's chest from the side like a hammer. The impact was brutal. The knife's path veered. Steel scraped metal as it glanced off the edge of Edric's chair, sparks spitting. The assassin staggered, air leaving his lungs. Aldrin did not stop. Using the momentum of his charge, he pivoted, hooking his left leg behind the man's ankle and driving him backward. With no right arm to catch himself, Aldrin twisted his torso, letting his weight slam the assassin to the ground, while his own shoulder hit stone instead of his face. Pain exploded along his collarbone. The knife skittered across the floor, spinning once before stopping at the edge of the dais. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The hall was a silent painting. The king half risen from his chair, hand on the table. Sir Corvin mid-step, sword half drawn. Lord Merrin frozen with his cup halfway to his mouth. Aldrin's breath came ragged. He forced his knee down on the assassin's chest, pinning him. He pressed the edge of his blade to the man's throat with his left hand. Not as clean a motion as it used to be, but still steady. Aldrin looked up at the king. "Blade, Your Majesty," he said, voice rough, as requested. The spell broke. "Guards!" Sir Corvin roared, the shout finally catching up to the moment. "Seize him!" Men in armor rushed forward, grabbing the assassin's arms and legs. Aldrin let them take the weight, pushing himself upright with a wince. His right side screamed in protest. Old wounds, new impact. He ignored them. Someone picked up the fallen knife and laid it on the table before the king. Edric stared at it, color draining from his face. The weapon was coated in a thin, dark sheen that was not just oil. "Poison," Corvin said quietly. "Fast, by the look." Edric swallowed once. "Search him," the captain ordered. One of the guards shoved back the assassin's sleeve, revealing a leather bracer stamped with a symbol Aldrin didn't recognize, a coiled serpent around a broken crown. "Not one of ours," Garrick muttered. "Or any neighbor we like." The assassin said nothing. His eyes, however, flicked once to Aldrin. Not in thanks, not in hatred, but in cold assessment. As if measuring the one thing he had not planned for. A man everyone had already counted out. The king's voice, when it came, shook. "Take him to the dungeons," Edric commanded. "Keep him breathing. I want names." The guards dragged the assassin away. The doors boomed shut behind them. For a long moment, no one in the hall spoke. The rain outside hammered against the windows like applause from a furious sky. Finally, Lord Meron cleared his throat. "Well," he said weakly, "I suppose half a guard is still half useful." The joke fell like a stone into a grave. No one laughed. Edric remained standing, one hand braced on the table. His gaze found Aldrin. The king looked at him now with the awareness of a man who had just heard a bell ring very close to his ear. One he hadn't known was there until it sounded. The weight of the moment pressed down. "Aldrin," Edric said. There was no mocking lilt to his voice this time. The entire hall watched, breath held. Servants, knights, advisors, all waiting to see what shape the king's pride would take, now that it had been dragged, thrashing, back from the edge of a blade. Edric began, then stopped. The word "thank" seemed to catch somewhere between his throat and his crown. He swallowed it. "I will speak with you," he said instead, "in my private chamber. Now." Sir Corvin's eyes widened just enough to show surprise. "As you command, Your Majesty," Aldrin said. He sheathed his sword, slower than he would have liked, and followed the king up the side steps behind the dais, through a small door, into the quieter, narrower halls of the royal wing. As the door closed behind them, the great hall erupted into frantic whispers. "Did you see? With one arm. If he hadn't moved, the king would be—" But Aldrin heard none of it. All he heard was the echo of Edric's question from that morning, and the answer his body had just given without words. What use is a guard with one arm? Enough, apparently, to stand between a king and the death no one else saw coming. The king's private chamber felt smaller than Aldrin remembered. The last time he'd stood here, he'd still had two arms, and Edric had still looked at him like a blade that could cut through any problem. Now, the room was lit by only 3 candles and a dying fire. Shadows clung to the corners like listening ghosts. Maps lay spread across a low table, stones weighing their edges. Goblets stood half-empty on a sideboard. Edric walked to the window first. Rain streaked the glass in thin silver lines, the storm outside pressing its forehead against the castle walls. For several long breaths, neither man spoke. Aldrin stayed by the door, back straight, left hand resting near his sword out of habit, not expectation. He didn't know why the king had brought him here instead of praising him publicly in the hall, or punishing him for acting without orders. With Edric, it could still go either way. Finally, the king exhaled. A slow, fragile sound. "I felt it," he said quietly, eyes on the rain. "The wind of that blade passing." Aldrin said nothing. "It was close," Edric added, as if he needed to convince himself. "Closer than anything has been to me in years." "That is what happens," Aldrin replied, "when too many men in a room are watching your face, and not your shadow." A humorless smile touched the king's mouth. "That sounded like an accusation," he said. "It was a fact, Your Majesty." They let the words hang. Edric turned at last to face him. In the softer light of the chamber, the lines at the corners of the king's eyes showed more clearly. The weight of the crown had carved them, not time alone. "You moved fast," Edric said. "I didn't know you could still—" "Still what?" Aldrin asked. "Still be what I was, even with half of what I had?" The sharpness in his own voice surprised him. Edric's jaw tightened. "Careful," the king murmured. "I was careful," Aldrin shot back, louder than he intended. "Out there, in the hall, when everyone else was too busy laughing at your joke to see a knife in a servant's sleeve." The room went very still. Aldrin realized what he'd said to whom. Old instincts screamed at him to drop to his knees, to apologize, to beg for pardon. He did not move. He had just stood between this man and a poisoned blade. If there was any moment in his entire life to speak plainly, it was now. Before the court rumor turned it into another story where the king was the only hero, Edric watched him, eyes cold, but not as cold as they used to be. "You think I don't know what they say?" the king asked. "That's not my concern," Aldrin replied. "My concern is what you say." The king's gaze darkened. "You forget yourself," he warned. "No," Aldrin said. "I remember myself. You are the one who tried to forget." The words fell between them like a sword stuck point down in the floor. Edric looked at him for a long time. Really looked, as if seeing him not just as a symbol of failure to joke about, but as a man who had once stood where others had fallen. "I knew," the king said slowly, "that you would take an arrow for me again." "I didn't take an arrow," Aldrin said. "I took the man holding it." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Aldrin pressed. "When you called me half a guard in front of men who never bled for you. When you used me as a story for your wine instead of a shield for your life." Edric opened his mouth, closed it again. Rain hammered the window harder. "I meant—" The king's fingers flexed once at his side, as if grasping for something that wasn't there. "I meant that if you could be cut down like that, if you could lose an arm, then so could I." Aldrin blinked. He hadn't expected that. "You humiliated me," the king continued, "so I didn't have to look at the truth in my own hands. Because if Aldrin the Unbroken could be broken, what did that say about the rest of us?" He gave a rough little laugh. "It was easier," he said, "to pretend it was funny." Silence stretched between them. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was the closest thing to a wound Aldrin had ever heard in the king's voice. "A king shouldn't fear that," Aldrin said quietly. "Being breakable." Edric's gaze snapped to his. "And what should a king fear?" he demanded. "The day," Aldrin replied, "he cannot admit he is." The words were simple. Their weight was not. Edric looked away first. "Do you know why I kept you?" he asked after a moment. "Why I didn't pension you off to some farm and let you vanish into a story told in taverns?" "I assumed," Aldrin said dryly, "you liked having a reminder of your mercy standing at the wall." Edric actually huffed a small laugh at that. "Partly," he admitted. "Kings like to see themselves as merciful. It helps us sleep." He walked to the table, hand brushing over the edges of a map without really seeing it. "But also," he said, "because every time I saw you standing at that wall with one arm and your head still high, I knew that if you could bear what you'd lost, then I could bear what I feared losing." Aldrin swallowed. "I never asked to be your mirror," he said. "And I never asked," Edric replied, turning back to him, "to owe my life to a man I've spent 3 years turning into a punchline." There it was, cracked, ungraceful, but real. The king stepped closer. No throne, no dais, no audience, just 2 men, differently scarred by the same kingdom. "I cannot take back what I've said in that hall," Edric went on. "What I've let others say. I cannot unteach them the shape of their laughter." He drew a breath. But I can decide what happens the next time they look at you." Aldrin's heart slowed, then sped. "Send me away," he said. "If you're afraid of what it will look like to stand by a broken shield, then cut me loose. Let them think whatever they like." Edric shook his head. "No," he said. "That's what I would have done yesterday." He seemed almost surprised by his own words. "Today," he went on, "I find I need you." There was no jest in it. "I need," Edric said, "someone who has already been broken and still stands. Someone who sees the cracks in others before they become blades at my table. Someone who doesn't need my approval to tell me the truth." He paused. "I need," the king finished, "the man who moved when everyone else in that hall hesitated." Aldrin felt something inside him shift. A long rusted hinge creaking open. "You have Sir Corvin," he said. "You have your knights, your spies, your council." I have men who answer to my crown," Edric replied. "I want one who answers to my conscience." Aldrin frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Edric said, "that from this night you stand where you always have. But not as a joke, not as a pity, not as a half thing I keep around to feel generous." He reached for a small wooden box on the side table and opened it. Inside lay an old metal pin. Simple iron shaped like a shield split down the middle, and reforged with a bar of metal across the break. Edric picked it up. "You used to be my sword," he said. "I called you that. I made you believe that was the only shape of your worth." He brought the pin closer, the candlelight catching on its dull surface. "Now," he said, "I name you something else." Aldrin's throat felt tight. "I don't need a title, Your Majesty." "This isn't for you," Edric said quietly. "It's for them. For the ones who need to learn what value looks like when it doesn't fit their stories." He stepped forward and pinned the broken shield emblem above Aldrin's left breast, just below the royal crest. "You will still wear armor," the king said. "You will still stand at my hall. You will still draw your sword when you must. But when I look at you, Aldrin, I will not see a ruined weapon." He held Aldrin's gaze, king to guard, man to man. "I will see," Edric said, "the first of my unbroken shields, those who have lost much, and still stand between me and the dark." The words hit Aldrin harder than any blow he'd taken on a battlefield. "Others will earn this," Edric added, touching the pin. "Soldiers who return from war with scars the court doesn't like to look at. Men and women missing limbs, eyes, voices, but not courage. If they can still stand, if they can still serve, they will stand with you. By my order." Aldrin swallowed against the lump in his throat. "You're changing the way they see us," he said. Edric shook his head. "No," he replied. "You changed it the moment you moved toward that knife when there was every reason to let it come." He stepped back. "I am only catching up." Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not a wall, a bridge. "You could still send me away," Aldrin said softly, "one last time, testing the shape of the night." Edric's answer was immediate. "I just named you the man who stands between my blind spots and my grave," he said. "If I send you away now, I may as well walk into the next knife myself." Aldrin huffed a sound that might, in better light, have been mistaken for a laugh. "As you wish, Your Majesty," he said. He bowed. Not the deep, automatic bow of a man who had been taught he was less. A soldier's bow. One given, not taken. When he straightened, Edric looked almost lighter. "Tomorrow," the king said, "they will whisper about what happened in the hall. Give them something new to talk about. Stand where you always do. Wear that pin. Let them choke on the shape of it." Aldrin touched the metal lightly. "And when they call me half a guard?" he asked. Edric's eyes flashed. "They won't," he said. "Not while I'm in the room." He turned back toward the window, toward the rain and the kingdom beyond. "Go, Aldrin," the king said. "Rest what you can. There will be other nights, other blades, other questions." Aldrin nodded once. His right sleeve swung gently at his side as he walked to the door. Empty, but no longer the only thing people would see. His left hand lingered on the latch for a moment. "Your Majesty," he said without turning. "For what it's worth, you were right about one thing." "Oh?" Edric asked. "Words don't stop steel," Aldrin said. "But sometimes, they stop the man holding it from standing alone." He opened the door. The great hall buzzed beyond, stories already rewriting themselves in the mouths of those who'd watched him move. As Aldrin stepped back into the light of the torches, Ronan's eyes found the new pin on his chest. The young guard straightened unconsciously, hand drifting to his own armor as if imagining the same mark there one day. Servants paused in their work, glancing at him not with pity, not with mockery, but with something hesitant and sharp. Hope. They would still talk. They would still laugh, some of them. Old habits clung like smoke. But when anyone asked, "What use is a guard with one arm?" someone in that hall would remember the sound of a knife hitting stone instead of flesh. The choked silence after a single, perfectly chosen move. The night a king needed the man he'd most underestimated, more than anyone. And in a kingdom slowly learning the meaning of second chances, they would whisper a different answer. Enough to change everything.